Hello everyone, and welcome back to Isaiah for Mormons. Today we're going to be doing Isaiah 33. This is a pretty straightforward chapter. It's not nearly as textually corrupt as 32, so it should be not too bad. This chapter is connected pretty closely to the last chapter. You remember what happens in 32. There are all kinds of kind of crazy things that happen, and he talks about the forest falling. Remember that last verse is probably not supposed to be there, so he talks about the people are dwelling peacefully and in sure dwellings and quiet resting places when it shall hail coming down on the forest, and the forest, the wood of the forest, will be brought low by the hail. So the implication is everybody is happy even when the storm is bringing everything down around them, which, as I observed, is exactly what happens. A lot of Judea gets destroyed and a lot of Judah's neighbors get destroyed, but Judah kind of survives. It has quite the black eye, but it survives. And Jerusalem also survives even though the other cities are destroyed. So much like a hut in a forest that has been brought low by a hailstorm, Jerusalem is going to survive, whereas everything around it is going to be destroyed. But here he starts talking about those people who are wicked, who are going to be destroyed. He says, this is Isaiah 33:1. Woe to thee that spoilest, and thou wast not spoiled, and dealest treacherously, and they dealt not treacherously with thee. When thou shalt cease to spoil, thou shalt be spoiled, and when thou shalt make an end to deal treacherously, they shall deal treacherously with thee. So we can see that there's kind of this connection there between the last chapter and this chapter. So this is a very interesting and, like I said, surprisingly not that corrupt chapter, it looks like. So it's nice to have a little bit of a reprieve from some of the textual corruption issues we've been dealing with in the past. Like I said, it's connected pretty well to the last chapter, although it's difficult to say whether or not this is connected to 34. 34 might be the beginning of something new, but we'll talk about that when we get there. And by the way, congratulations everyone. This is chapter 33. You know what that means? It means you're halfway through. At the end of the day, you will be halfway through the book of Isaiah. And not just through reading Isaiah, but through getting a very in-depth understanding of it. So if you've made it this far, congratulations to you. So his comments seem definitely to show the contrast between the wicked and the righteous, just like the last chapter. Let me read you a little bit so you can see what I mean. Woe to thee that spoilest, and thou wast not spoiled, and dealest treacherously, and they dealt not treacherously with thee. When thou shalt cease to spoil, thou shalt be spoiled, and when thou shalt make an end to deal treacherously, they shall deal treacherously with thee. O Lord, be gracious unto us, we have waited for thee. Be thou their arm every morning, our salvation also in the time of trouble. At the noise of the tumult the people fled, at the lifting up of thyself the nations were scattered, and your spoil shall be gathered like the gathering of the caterpillar, as the running to and fro of locusts shall he run upon them. The Lord is exalted, for he dwelleth on high. He hath filled Zion with judgment and righteousness. And wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times, and strength of salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure. So, what does this mean? He's been talking the whole time, really, minus perhaps editing problems. He's been talking about the rich. He always goes back to this, the rich who abuse the poor. We talked about that a lot lately, actually. And he says, woe to thee that spoilest, presumably those that spoil the poor. Woe to thee that spoilest, and thou wast not spoiled. So in other words, woe to you who exploit people. You haven't been exploited. Implication is you haven't been exploited yet. You lie to people. You deal treacherously with people. Others have not dealt treacherously with you yet. When you will cease to spoil, presumably because there's no one left to spoil, everybody is poor, there's no more they can squeeze out of the populace, thou shalt be spoiled. How are they going to be spoiled? Well, when the Assyrians come in. When thou shalt make an end to deal treacherously, when you stop lying to people, they, the Assyrian army, is going to deal treacherously with you. So you guys have been abusing the poor, you've been lying to them, you've been taking all their stuff under false pretenses, but now the Assyrians are going to come in, and when the country is in a position where you have been brought low, you aren't in a position to do that anymore, the Assyrians are going to do that to you. But then he says, we keep getting this contrast back and forth between the wicked and the righteous. In verse 2 he says, O Lord, be gracious unto us. We have waited for thee. Be thou their arm every morning, our salvation also in the time of trouble. Be thou their arm every morning. It could be Isaiah's talking about the people who are righteous. It could also be a small mistake. Honestly, some of these things are a slip of the pen away from being one thing or the other. So this could be thou our arm every morning. But the implication, I think, is the same either way. Be thou the arm of the people every morning, our salvation also in the time of trouble. Arm, a lot of times, it means military action. When your arm is made bare, presumably you have a sword in your hand, you're lifting it up, and your arm is literally made bare. Your sleeve kind of falls down and you lift up your sword arm. So be thou their arm every morning. He says, be good to us. We have waited for thee. We've done everything you told us to do. We've waited for your salvation. So be their arm every morning. Every morning when it's time to get up for battle, you fight for us. Be the one that saves us from our enemies in the time of trouble. And even though he's talking about military victories here, I think this is very apt for all of us when we go through difficult times. It says, at the noise of the tumult, the people fled. At the lifting up of thyself, the nations were scattered. Dead Sea Scrolls make a small variant here, but I don't think it's terribly significant. This works just fine. So he says, at the noise of the tumult, the people fled. The chaos of battle means everyone is running away. So when God lifts himself up. At the lifting up of thyself, the nations were scattered. God lifts himself up to fight, and all the Gentiles run away. And your spoil shall be gathered like the gathering of the caterpillar, as the running to and fro of locusts shall he run upon them. This is a very kind of excellent image. I'm sure many of you probably have seen this. Caterpillars kind of descending on crops to consume them. I know that I had that problem in San Diego. I actually have an odd dislike of white butterflies because of this. They would descend in clouds of white butterflies and lay their eggs, and then the caterpillars would just consume all my lovely garden I tried to cultivate. And this is exactly that kind of thing. God is going to gather spoil like caterpillars eat food. Any of you that have seen that know what that looks like. A huge, huge consumption of food. As the running to and fro of locusts shall he run upon them. In the ancient Near East, and even still today you see this sometimes, these giant clouds of locusts that just descend upon certain regions and just destroy everything in their path. Really is kind of amazing to see that, and that's the image here. God is going to come out and he's going to fall upon them and take the spoil like a caterpillar eating food or like a locust eating crops. The Lord is exalted, for he dwelleth on high. He hath filled Zion with judgment and righteousness. Now this, the Lord is exalted or literally lifted up, for he dwelleth on high. This is probably a throwback to Isaiah chapter 6. We remember Isaiah sees the Lord sitting on his throne. He's lifted up, and he's sitting on a throne. Dwelleth on high can mean he's living on high. The same word can be, in Hebrew, can be he's just sitting. So God is sitting on his throne, and correspondingly, we've seen this all the time in Isaiah, he hath filled Zion with judgment and righteousness. Zion is, at this point, is referring to the city of Jerusalem, although that will change depending on where we are in the Old Testament or other texts. But right here it appears to be Jerusalem. He's filled Jerusalem with judgment, or really justice is the implication of that word actually. Justice and righteousness. So God is dwelling on high. He's dispensing his justice and righteousness to the people as he dwells on high in Jerusalem. Specifically, remember the temple. That's where Isaiah has that vision in Isaiah 6, is the temple. So the idea is that God is sitting there in his temple, lifted up, filling the city with justice and righteousness. And wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times, and strength of salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure. Wisdom and knowledge. This verse is very interesting. We may have a little bit of a wisdom literature edition here. a lot of wisdom literature catchphrases are in this verse. If it is, it's not that big of a deal. We're just going to talk about it as though it were part of the chapter. It's not a major interruption. Wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times. So wisdom and knowledge, presumably real wisdom which comes from God, and knowledge of God, presumably, is going to make your time stable. You're not going to have to deal with war anymore, presumably because God is going to do it for you, as it says in the next part of the verse. And strength of salvation. God is going to save you with a strong hand. The fear of the Lord is his treasure. The fear of the Lord, or really respect for the Lord, is what's going to preserve them. So then we get some more very interesting things about God as a warrior and what happens in this war. Behold, their valiant ones shall cry without. The ambassadors of peace shall weep bitterly. The highways lie waste, the wayfaring man ceaseth. He hath broken the covenant, he hath despised the cities, he regardeth no man. The earth mourneth and languisheth. Lebanon is ashamed and hewn down. Sharon is like a wilderness, and Bashan and Carmel shake off their fruits. Now will I rise, saith the Lord, now will I be exalted, now will I lift up myself. Ye shall conceive chaff, ye shall bring forth stubble, your breath as fire shall devour you, and the people shall be as the burnings of lime, as thorns cut up shall they be burned in the fire. Quite the thing to say. But we see here, as the war continues, their valiant ones shall cry without. In other words, they will be outside of the city crying, and presumably crying to the people to surrender. The ambassadors of peace, the people they send in to officially say that they're going to surrender, shall weep bitterly. That's the idea here. He's going to destroy them so badly that those seeking for peace will just come in weeping and beg for mercy. The highways lie waste, the wayfaring man ceaseth. He hath broken the covenant, he hath despised the cities, he regardeth no man. God has demolished things so thoroughly, there aren't even travelers on the road. He hath broken the covenant is an interesting thing here to say. Presumably this is not he has broken the covenant with his people. We might translate that better as he has dissolved the alliance. So there's groups of people, presumably within the Assyrian Empire, kind of united against Israel and Judah, and he says, these guys are going to get totally wiped out. The alliance is going to be destroyed. He hath despised the cities. He regardeth no man. God just comes in and wipes everything out. The earth mourneth and languisheth. Lebanon is ashamed and hewed down. Remember, Lebanon is this area pretty similar to today's boundaries for Lebanon, and has these giant cedar trees. So he says, Lebanon is ashamed and hewn down. The country is hewn down just as one might hew down some of those lovely cedar trees. Sharon, also a really nice fertile area up there, is like a wilderness. And Bashan and Carmel, also very, very lush areas up in the north, shake off their fruits. So all these notably lush areas are going to be desolate. Now that's literal language probably because of the war, but also figurative language. All these great cities that thought that they were so great are going to be brought low. Now will I rise up, saith the Lord. Now will I be exalted. Now will I lift up myself. God says, I'm now the one that's going to take charge. I will rise up and lift up myself. You shall conceive chaff. You shall bring forth stubble. Your breath as fire shall devour you. And the people shall be as the burnings of lime, as thorns cut up shall they be burned in the fire. So he says, now you're not going to bring forth good things, lovely fruits and things like that. You will conceive chaff. And chaff, remember, is the extras that you get after you harvest a field. He says, you shall conceive chaff, you shall bring forth stubble, right? Because what happens is you harvest your crops, you thresh everything, and the chaff, that little tiny straw wrapping for each grain, that's what he's talking about there. You shall conceive chaff. It's that worthless stuff that blows away when you harvest grain. You shall bring forth stubble, the little bottom parts of the field. So he says, you're going to just bring forth worthless stuff that's ready to burn. That's all it's good for is burning. That's what people usually do with this. They light it on fire. It says, your breath as fire shall devour you. You're going to bring forth this stuff that's only good for burning, and your own breath will devour yourselves. You'll burn yourselves out. And the people shall be as the burnings of lime. As thorns cut up shall they be burned in the fire. So burnings of lime, this is when you take, for example, stone, limestone, you burn it so that you can make fertilizer. So that's this idea of these people being consumed by fire. As thorns cut up shall they be burned in the fire. And this idea is that they're just going to be completely destroyed. They're going to try to recover, but even as they're trying to cover, they're going to be completely destroyed. As thorns cut up shall they be burned in the fire. Completely worthless thorns that you pull out and cut up and burn. That's what it's going to be like for these people. So God is going to destroy the wicked utterly and preserve the righteous. And this concept of burning is part of the beginnings of the concept of hell that we will eventually get. This is not something that we necessarily get at this period as much, but it is something that will evolve in some ways out of Isaiah, this idea of hell and being a place of burning. This, of course, is different for every culture, the concept of hell, but the idea of hell as a burning place is something that we'll slowly get during this period. And by the time we get to 600 BC, when Lehi leaves Jerusalem, the idea of a lake of fire and brimstone kind of a thing, of burning in hell, is something that will be established. Though this is obviously just an image, we don't think that we really are burning in hell. But the idea is that you're in a terrible position that you can't escape from, and you're suffering. I'm sure most people grasp that. So then he continues, "Hear ye that are far off what I have done, and ye that are near acknowledge my might. The sinners in Zion are afraid, fearfulness have surprised the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly. He that despiseth the gain of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from the holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil, he shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him, his waters shall be sure. Thine eyes shall see the king in his beauty. They shall behold the land that is very far off. Thine heart shall meditate terror. Where is the scribe? Where is the receiver? Where is he that counteth the towers? Thou shalt not see a fierce people, a people of deeper speech than thou canst perceive, of a stammering tongue that thou canst not understand." So here he says, listen, everyone, no matter how far away from me you are, hear ye that are far off what I have done, and ye that are near acknowledge my might. Everyone should acknowledge the Lord. This is something that Isaiah is going to ratchet up later, but he's already hitting this point. Everyone needs to acknowledge what the Lord is going to do. The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness has surprised the hypocrites. Those in Zion that are sinning, he's been talking about the righteous and the destruction of the wicked, and he's saying to them, don't think that just because you live in Zion you can escape. You can't. The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness has surprised the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? He was just talking about the wicked being burned. Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? Now this is a great, great image. This comes from Zoroastrianism, almost certainly. We'll need to continue to talk about this. I may have a whole episode devoted to Zoroastrianism. In fact, I probably will, because you just need to know about it. Let me just say here that there is the concept that God lives in fire. This is something that we see in the Old Testament pretty consistently. It's also something that we see in Zoroastrianism. You remember that when God comes to places, he very often manifests himself through fire. And in fact, even in our own time, when Joseph Smith has the first vision, in one of the accounts of the first vision as he's writing, he says, I saw a pillar of fire, and then you can see that gets scratched out, and he says, light. So even in the time of Joseph Smith, there's this idea that God lives in fire. His brightness is so intense that it's like fire. So he's talking here about God coming through and burning everyone. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? Who's going to be able to withstand this fire? But there's also the concept that God is this fire, and he lives in the fire and radiates this fire. So it's not just who was righteous enough that God's not going to punish them, but who can withstand the presence of God. And in Zoroastrianism, that's a major element, is that God is going to judge the world, and we are all going to walk through fire, and that will purify us and allow us to be able to be with God. It will destroy the wicked and purify the rest. This is something that definitely is taken into the Book of Mormon, is taken into Isaiah and a lot of the rest of the Old Testament. And we mentioned this before, but you might say, well, why are they adopting stuff from Zoroastrianism? That seems so weird. But we do this kind of thing all the time. We pick up concepts from other groups and wrap our arms around them, and that's a good thing. Christmas is an amalgamation of all kinds of different things. We get it in the church mostly from Protestantism and Catholicism, but we've wrapped our arms around Christmas and Easter, even though it comes from something that's really outside our tradition in a lot of ways. We in the West have wrapped our arms around those holidays, and there's nothing wrong with that. So for Isaiah to wrap his arms around the true sayings that come out of the book called the Gathas, the main oldest writings within Zoroastrianism, there's nothing wrong with that. It makes perfect sense to, when you find truth in other areas, to bring it in. And Brigham Young, kind of feisty as always, says, if there is truth in hell, we want that too. He says that very forcefully, but that's really the idea. Wherever there's truth, we want that. And so that's what we see here. Isaiah appears to have wrapped his arms around something within Zoroastrianism and is bringing it in. That's one reason people say, well, a lot of this is written later, but there's quotations from these texts in the Book of Mormon, which makes us say, perhaps not. Perhaps these things are much earlier than we would think. The influence of Zoroastrianism isn't just the Persian period, it's the traditionally Persian religion. But we would say, they're getting these things from Persian religion probably much earlier. I have some theories about that. We'll talk about that at another time. So who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly, he that despiseth the gain of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from the holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. So those that do the right thing, they walk righteously, they speak uprightly, they say the right things. They do not oppress people for money. They don't take bribes. They shake their hands from holding of bribes. I love that image. That stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood. They close their ears from hearing blood, presumably from they don't listen to witnesses who falsely accuse and things like that. They shut his eyes from seeing evil. And that doesn't mean that they close their eyes to everything that's going on. It means that they reject these things. They reject the unrighteous shedding of blood. They reject evil. That's the idea here. So only those that are righteous will survive this fire that God is going to bring down on everyone, literal and figurative. Because, of course, that's how war works, right? You have to understand that a lot of war was about burning crops and starving people out. So it's a very uncomfortably apt image. He shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him, his waters shall be sure. So these good people will dwell on high. We were just talking about how God dwells on high. But the good will dwell on high with God. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. This is kind of funny, but presumably means there will be munitions of rocks. You might say a fortress on a very large rocky outcropping. So his place of defense will be a fortress on a large rocky outcropping. Bread shall be given him, his water shall be sure. He'll always have bread and water. So presumably this is a direct prophecy that the temple is going to be spared. That's where the temple is. It's on this rocky outcropping. So they will all be with God, literally there at the temple, withstanding the siege, and they're not going to have problems. But also, figuratively, it will be as though they were in a siege. They will be with God, and though besieged, sort of metaphorically, they will still be all right. They will never lack bread or water. So we've seen this consistently through Isaiah. He has literal meanings, but he also has metaphorical meanings that he weaves together. Sometimes we make the mistake of trying to read Isaiah so literally, and we find that it isn't interesting or useful, or that it's confusing. But that's because, yeah, you have to get the literal understanding, and he certainly has literal meanings, but we also have to get the metaphorical meaning as well. So here it says, "Thine eyes shall see the king in his beauty, they shall behold the land that is very far off. Thine heart shall meditate terror. Where is the scribe? Where is the receiver? Where is he that counted the towers?" Now this, "thine eyes shall see the king in his beauty," once again, this is probably God as king. We've been talking about this a lot. So they will see the king in his beauty, and then they will behold the land that is very far off. Where? Presumably Assyria. Then it says, "Thine heart shall meditate terror." They'll be afraid at what they see because they don't see anything. They say, "Where's the scribe? Where's the receiver? Where is he that counted the towers? Where is everybody that manages this kingdom?" Because if they're not there, presumably they're on the move and they're coming to attack them, right? So then in 19 it says, "Thou shalt not see a fierce people, a people of a deeper speech than thou canst perceive, of a stammering tongue that thou canst not understand." This is an interesting characterization of the Assyrians, characterizing them by language, not by how they look. We actually see that a lot in the Old Testament. It says these guys are going to come and speak in a language that you can't understand, but you're not going to see them. But, on the other hand, look upon Zion, the city of our solemnities. Thine eyes shall see Jerusalem, a quiet habitation, a tabernacle that shall not be taken down. Not one of the stakes thereof shall ever be removed, neither shall any of the cords thereof be broken. But there the glorious Lord will be unto us, a place of broad rivers and streams, wherein shall be no galley with oars, neither shall a gallant ship pass thereby. For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our giver, our lawgiver, the Lord is our king, he will save us. Thy tacklings are loosed, they could not well strengthen their mast, they could not spread the sail. Then is the prey of a great spoil divided, the lame take the prey. And the inhabitant shall not say, I am sick. The people that dwell therein shall be forgiven their iniquity. So here we see God as king, as just what I was saying. You're not even going to see the Assyrians. They're going to come, but they're not going to come into where you are. So he says, you look out there, you see the kingdom, presumably Assyria, you don't see anybody, right? But now look upon Zion, the city of our solemnities, presumably where we have our feasts, is what that means. Thine eyes shall see Jerusalem, a quiet habitation. Jerusalem is going to be at rest, a tabernacle that shall not be taken down. Now that is just a tent that will not be taken down, but also may refer to the actual tabernacle there. Not one of the stakes thereof even. The tent stakes will be ever taken away. The cords of the tent will not be broken. This is a very specific prophecy. Once again, he's saying, in effect, Jerusalem is going to be just fine. If Jerusalem were like a tent, not even a stake would be removed, not even a cord would be broken. And like I said, there's probably a play here on the temple. This is why people later got the idea that, well, the temple's here. That means Jerusalem can never be destroyed. No matter how much we sin, Jerusalem's always going to be safe. And Jeremiah has to say, listen, guys, Isaiah only meant that when you were righteous. When you're wicked, God doesn't really care. He can move somewhere else, right? But this is where this idea probably comes from, verses like this. But there the glorious Lord will be unto us a place of broad rivers and streams, wherein shall go no galley with oars, neither shall gallant ship pass thereby. Really is a beautiful verse. But the Lord will be like a river of water, rivers and streams. And yet there will be no galley with oars, no big ships, presumably military ships. It'll be like if you were to have perfect and ideal conditions for raising crops and yet not have war, which is so foreign to these people. But that's what Isaiah is describing here. For, he goes on to say, for the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king. He will save us. Very specifically what we've been talking about, God as king. Thy tacklings are loosed, they could not well strengthen their mast, they could not spread the sail. Then is the prey of a great spoil divided, the lame take the prey. Now, this is kind of an interesting verse, but it simply just goes back to what we were just talking about. A place of broad rivers and streams wherein shall go no alley with oars, neither shall gallant ship pass by. So the idea is God will save us, and there will be no ships there, because the tacklings are loosed. They could not well strengthen the mast. The rope can't hold up the mast. It can't get the sails out. So the prey of a great spoil is divided. The lame take the prey. So the idea is that it's going to be like this broad river where there is no ship. Why? Because the ships are stranded. They can't do anything. Even the lame, even people that can barely walk, can hobble up and grab prey and take it away from the ship because the ship is stranded. It can't do anything. So that's the idea that we get here. And this may have happened, actually, in real life. The Assyrian army, you'll remember, gets partially wiped out by a plague. The angel of the Lord comes and kills a bunch of them, and the rest of them run away. Well, do they drop some of their stuff when they run away and people are able to just come and pick out what they want? Maybe. It's possible. But obviously this is also figurative, that things are going to go so well for them that it's going to be as though a ship were stranded there and they can just take whatever they want. There isn't going to be any war. Things are going to go really well for them. They're going to bring in so much agricultural product and trade good that it's almost like they were plundering a ship that was coming in. The inhabitants shall not say, I am sick. The people that dwell therein shall be forgiven their iniquity. Now the inhabitants shall not say, I am sick. It's a little bit of an odd thing to say, but it could be nobody that lives there will say, I am sick. The people who live there will be forgiven their iniquity. In other words, everyone is going to be happy. They're all going to have enough to eat. They're all going to not be sick and starving. They're going to be happy finally. And the people who live there will be forgiven their iniquity. Now this is pretty key, that it envisions this time when people have repented and God is able to forgive them. He is always laying into people, right? But the conception here is, if you repent, though, you will be forgiven. And I think that's really one of the main themes that we see throughout not only this part of Isaiah, but especially later on. And I think, honestly, we've talked about this before, it depends on how you break up the chapters, but this might be the end of a speech. The next chapter talks about all the earth coming near to listen. So this could be a note of hope ending a longer speech that Isaiah has been giving, maybe for a while. Hard to say exactly how long the speech has been, but this is probably the end of the speech. And he's been talking about people who are not doing the right things, who repent, but people who do the right thing and are saved. He's giving a series of speeches leading up to the Assyrian invasion. We're going to get the next speech, and what I think is probably his best speech. I think it might be the speech right before the battle. We're going to get that next. At least it's his best pre-Assyrian war speech, in my opinion. We get that 34, 35, and then as we proceed, we will continue to get more of this speech. I may have brought this up before, but some of these are almost like the St. Christmas Day speech from Henry V. That one definitely that we get going forward is really like that. It's interrupted. I've mentioned this before. It's literally interrupted almost in the middle of a sentence by 3 big old chapters, but we can still kind of make sense of it. and figure it out. So we will talk a little bit more about that later, but I just wanted to summarize what Isaiah is saying here, that God is going to bless people if they repent. And in fact, God is going to come out and save them. He's going to fight their battles for them. They're not going to have to worry about it at all. God is going to fight their battles for them, and if they're righteous, they'll be able to be with him. This desolation that's going to sweep through everything, he's been saying that the last few chapters, is going to touch the wicked. And God is going to take care of them, and everything is going to be okay if they repent. They will be forgiven their iniquity if they repent. And that's the thrust of what we've been talking about, and it's what we will continue to see. And there are different ways of looking at some of those verses later. We'll talk about that, but definitely the idea of, if you guys repent, you will be saved, and God will take care of you. They do repent. Apparently not a moment too soon. God does save them. We'll talk about that as we carry on. But anyway, that's the end of chapter 33. We'll get to some interesting